August 17, 1859. Savannah's largest slave auction house fell silent when lot number 43 stepped onto platform. 27 bidders had their paddles ready that sweltering afternoon, but within minutes, only one hand remained in the air. The woman standing in chains was young, healthy, and trained in valuable domestic work. Her starting price had been set deliberately low, yet, for some reason, every plantation owner in that room lowered their eyes and took a step back. They all knew something whispered about in the corridors, but never spoken aloud. One man, newly arrived from Charleston, hadn't heard those whispers. He paid $12 for a woman worth $200. Within 6 months, he would understand why that auction house had gone so quiet, and by then it would be far too late to save himself. Before we continue the story of what happened in Chatham County that year, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like this, pulled from the darkest corners of American history, are what we bring you every week. And drop a comment telling us what state or city you're watching from. I want to know how far these tales of terror travel. Now, let me tell you about the purchase that changed everything. The auction house on Broughton Street had witnessed thousands of transactions since its opening in 1842, but the events of that August afternoon would be remembered unlike any other sale. The air inside the building was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and a fear no amount of whitewash could cover. But there was something else that day, something the regular attendees noticed right away. A tension that made even hardened slave traders shift uncomfortably in their seats. Savannah in 1859 stood as one of the South's most prosperous cities, its wealth built entirely on cotton and forced labor. The port handled millions of pounds of the white crop every year, and the surrounding plantations competed fiercely for the most productive workers. Chatham County soil was rich, the growing season long, and its plantation owners ruthless in their pursuit of profit. Thomas Cornelius Pute arrived in Savannah 3 weeks before that fateful auction. At 34 years old, he represented the new kind of Southern money, the kind that made old families uneasy. His father had made a fortune in Charleston through cotton speculation, but died suddenly, leaving Thomas with more wealth and experience. He had purchased the old Waverly Plantation site unseen, eager to prove himself among Georgia's planting elite. The property came cheap. Its previous owner had died without heirs, and Thomas saw it as his chance to build a legacy. The Waverly estate stretched across 800 acres of prime cottonland along the Vernon River. The main house, though in need of repairs, still carried the grand columns of old Southern pride. 42 enslaved people came with the property, but Thomas's overseer, a lean man named Hutchkins, advised he'd need at least 60 to run the land properly for the coming season. That's what brought Thomas to the Broughton Street auction house that August morning, cash in hand, determination in his eyes. The auction began at 10 o'clock. Thomas bid successfully on 3 young men and an experienced cook, spending nearly $5,000 by noon. During the lunch break, he overheard a conversation between 2 planters he'd met at a dinner party the week before. "You staying for the afternoon session?" one asked. "No reason to. Already got what I came for. Besides, I know what's coming. Heard they're finally selling her. About time. Been sitting in the holding pens for 3 weeks. Nobody wants to buy. Still can't believe what happened at the Peton place. 3 men dead in 2 months. 4, if you count old Peton himself. Though Dr. Reeves said it was his heart. Mighty convenient timing," the other replied. Thomas stepped back before they could notice him. His curiosity sparked as the auction resumed at 1. Several bidders from the morning hadn't returned. The first 3 afternoon lots sold quickly, and then came lot 43. The woman who stepped onto the platform moved with a dignity that seemed impossible given her situation. She looked to be in her early 30s, her skin the color of polished walnut, her features sharp and defined. But it was her eyes that struck Thomas most, dark, almost black, and holding the kind of stillness that came from someone who had stopped hoping, yet found strength in hopelessness. Lot 43, The auctioneer called without enthusiasm. Female, approximately 32 years of age, name of Celia, experience in household duties, particularly cooking and medical assistance. Has served as midwife and herb doctor, literate in English, no known physical defects. Starting bid, $10. Thomas waited for raised paddles. Instead, silence. $10 was insultingly low for a woman with such skills. Midwives were valuable, often earning their owners good income by attending births across the county. $10, the auctioneer repeated. Do I hear 10? The silence stretched. Men deliberately looked away, studying floors, ceilings, their own hands, anything but the woman on the platform. Thomas raised his paddle. $10 to the gentleman in the blue coat. The auctioneer said quickly, relief in his voice. Do I hear 12? Nothing. The room stayed frozen. Going once at $10, going twice, sold for $10 to the gentleman in blue. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. The woman, Celia, turned her gaze toward Thomas for the first time. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. A flicker of recognition or maybe assessment. Then she was led away. After the auction, Thomas approached the office to finalize his purchases. When he inquired about Celia's history, the clerk's pen hesitated briefly before continuing. Came from the Peton estate. Property was liquidated after Mr. Peton's death 3 months ago. Her skills are accurately listed. That's what the inventory said. Seems unusual no one else bid, Thomas remarked. The clerk looked up briefly. Not my place to question what buyers do or don't do, sir. Your total comes to $6,710. Music fades and the journey to Waverly took just over an hour along the river road. As they approached, the main house came into view. A 2-story structure with 6 columns across the front portico, its white paint fading in places. Beyond it lay the quarters, 2 long buildings, and further still, the cotton field stretching toward a tree line in perfect rows. When they arrived, Hutchkins began organizing the new arrivals. The men were assigned to the field gangs. The cook was sent to take over the main house kitchen. But when it came to Celia, Hutchkins hesitated. Would you want this one, Mr. Pute? He asked. Thomas thought for a moment. She has medical training. We'll use her as a midwife. Have her set up in the old overseer's cabin near the quarters. Hutchkins nodded slowly. Yes, sir, though we already have old patients who tend to such things. Then Celia can assist her. 2 pairs of hands are better than 1. Thomas was about to ask about Hutchkins's reluctance when a servant appeared, announcing that Josiah Crenshaw had arrived to pay his respects to the new owner. Thomas recognized the name, the man he'd overheard outside the auction house. Crenshaw waited on the front portico, a heavy-set man in his late 50s, dressed in casual Southern elegance. After the usual pleasantries over bourbon, Crenshaw shifted the conversation. I noticed you made some purchases today, he said. Good selections, though I sensed you didn't hear all the talk about one particular acquisition. Thomas met his gaze. You're referring to Celia, the woman I bought for $10. Crenshaw raised an eyebrow. Did you wonder why no one else bid? The thought crossed my mind, Thomas replied. Crenshaw set his glass down carefully. That woman came from the Peton estate. Dr. Harold Peton died 3 months ago, healthy one day, gone the next. His nephew inherited and sold everything immediately. Couldn't get away fast enough. He paused, his tone growing quieter. Peton's death alone wouldn't have raised eyebrows. But it was what came before, and before that, his overseer, a man named Kelly, died of brain fever after 2 weeks of raving. Before him, Peton's driver, Marcus, found dead in the stables with a broken neck. They said a horse kicked him, but Marcus knew horses better than anyone. And before that, Peton's physician, Dr. Simon Vance, dead from influenza complications. Thomas listened carefully. You're suggesting these deaths were connected? Crenshaw leaned forward. 4 men tied to the Peton household, all dead within 2 months. And the only common thread was that woman, Celia. She prepared the medicines, the tonics, the teas. She had access to the main house, to the kitchen, to the sick rooms. And she had reason. What reason? Thomas asked. About 6 months ago, Celia's daughter fell ill. Pneumonia, they thought. Dr. Vance attended her. The girl died 3 days later. Celia claimed the doctor was drunk, gave her the wrong treatment, and killed her child through negligence. She made loud accusations. Peton had her whipped and confined. 2 weeks later, Dr. Vance was dead. Then Marcus. Then Kelly. Then Peton. That could be coincidence, Thomas said quietly. Could be, Crenshaw replied. But that woman knows herbs and roots better than most doctors. She knows what heals and what kills, and she's got nothing left to lose. He stood, buttoning his coat. I came as a courtesy, Mr. Pute. What you do with that information is your business. But if I were you, I'd sell that woman quickly, or put her in the fields where she can't touch anyone's food or drink. That evening, Thomas went to the overseer's cabin where Celia had been housed. She sat on the rough bed, hands unbound, posture straight despite the day's exhaustion. When she saw him, she stood, her eyes meeting his directly. You're Celia, Thomas said. Yes, master. I'm told you have skill as a midwife and herbalist. Where did you learn? My mother was a midwife before me. She learned from her mother. I learned from watching, then doing, and I can read. So I study books whenever I could find them. Her candor surprised him. I'm also told you came from the Peton estate, he continued. There were several deaths there. People die, master, Celia said simply. That's the one certain thing in this world. Indeed, Thomas replied, but the timing caused some talk. White folks always talk, she said, her tone even, especially when they don't understand something. And what didn't they understand, he asked. Celia said nothing for a long moment. Then, softly, they didn't understand that debts come due. One way or another, everything balances in the end. The words could have been philosophical or threatening. Thomas decided to be direct. Did you kill them? Celia gave a faint, humorless smile. Can't kill a man with words, master, or with prayers, or by hoping real hard that justice finds him. If they died, it was divine providence, or their own sins catching up. I'm just a slave. I don't have the power to do anything but what I'm told. You'll work as midwife here, Thomas said firmly. Tend to the sick, deliver babies, prepare medicines as needed, under old patients' supervision. Yes, master. And Celia, whatever happened at Peton's place, it stays there. Here at Waverly, we start fresh. Understood? Yes, master, she said quietly. Understood perfectly. That night, Thomas lay awake thinking about Celia's daughter, 16 years old, dead from pneumonia, or maybe from a doctor's negligence. He thought about a mother's grief and what it might drive someone to do. He thought about herbs and plants, how the same knowledge that could heal could also harm. But most of all, he thought about 4 dead men and 1 woman with nothing left to lose. The harvest began in late September. Dark clouds gathered over the Atlantic. A late-season hurricane was forming. If the cotton wasn't picked before the storm hit, an entire year's profit could be lost. Thomas drove his workers hard, as every planter did during harvest. They rose before dawn and labored until darkness made it impossible to continue. Celia wasn't in the fields. She worked alongside old patients instead. Within a week, even Hutchkins had to admit they'd reached an understanding. Old Patient says a new woman knows her business, he reported. Knows plants and remedies patients never heard of. Asked if she could start a proper herb garden. Thomas approved it, reasoning Celia would still be under supervision. The garden began as a small plot behind the quarters. Comfort for wounds, feverfew for headaches, willow bark for pain, chamomile for stomach ailments. Each plant was labeled in neat handwriting, and Celia kept a journal documenting everything. October brought the hurricane everyone had been expecting. It struck on the 12th, with winds so strong they bent the trees nearly to ground, and rain so thick fog made visibility impossible. The storm raged for 18 relentless hours. When it finally passed, nearly 20% of the cotton was destroyed, and part of the quarter's roof had been torn away. Within 2 days of the hurricane, people began to fall ill. It started with the children, fever, chills, violent coughing, and soon spread to the adults. Within a week, 23 people were sick, including 3 house servants and Hutchinson's wife. Thomas sent to Savannah for a doctor. The young physician who arrived looked overwhelmed the moment he stepped off his horse. Rest, fluids, and regular doses of calomel, he prescribed. Keep them warm and dry. The fever should break within a week or so. After the doctor left, Thomas found Celia in the quarters, moving from patient to patient with quiet efficiency. She checked temperatures, listened to breathing, and examined each person with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The doctor prescribed calomel, Thomas told her. Celia didn't look up. Calomel makes it worse, she said. Weakens them more than the fever ever could. It's what doctors use, Thomas replied. Doctors kill more people than they save, she said flatly. You want these people to live so they can keep working? Then let me treat them my way. Thomas should have been offended by her tone, but instead he asked, What would you do differently? No calomel. Willow bark tea for the fever. Honey and garlic for the cough. Elderberry to strengthen them. Keep them hydrated. Boil water only, not from a river. And most important, keep the sickest ones apart. This illness spreads through the air. Group them too close, and you'll lose everyone. Her words went against everything accepted at the time. Most people believed diseases came from bad air, not from person to person. But Thomas had noticed patterns before, how sickness often spread through groups. Do it your way, he said finally, but if people start dying, that's your responsibility. People dying is always someone's responsibility, Master, Celia replied quietly. The question is whose? She organized the sick into 3 groups by severity, preparing teas and tonics with care. Within 3 days, the fevers began to break in the first patients. Within a week, all but 2 had recovered, both elderly and already frail. Under normal treatment, Thomas suspected the death toll would have been far higher. Word spread quickly. By early November, neighboring planners began visiting, asking to borrow Celia's services. Thomas agreed, partly out of politeness, partly because the extra fees brought in welcome income. Celia was sent to the Mansfield Plantation for yellow fever, to the Rutledge Place for a difficult childbirth, and to a farm near the Augie River for a snake bite. Each time, she succeeded where others would have failed. Her reputation grew. Celia could heal what others couldn't. But reputation is dangerous, especially for someone in her position. People began whispering about the Peaton estate again. If she knew so much about healing, might she also know about the opposite? Thomas heard the rumors, but dismissed them. Celia had been nothing but professional since she arrived. She had saved his workers and earned him money. Whatever had happened at Peaton's was in the past. December brought unusual cold, frost coating the field by morning. The cotton harvest, despite the hurricane, was complete, and Thomas had sold his crop for a respectable price. For the first time in months, he began to relax. He felt he had survived his first year without disaster. That was when the first sign appeared. Hutchins came to Main House one Tuesday morning, his face pale and hands trembling. Mr. Pruitt, you need to come to the quarters. Now! A crowd had gathered near the north end of the quarters. They stepped aside as Thomas approached, revealing a strange symbol painted on the wall, in what looked like blood, or perhaps dark red clay. It was intricate, a circle with radiating lines and smaller circles at fixed points. In the center was a handprint, adult-sized, fingers spread wide. What is this? Thomas demanded. An older man named Daniel stepped forward. It's a warning, Master. Old magic, African magic, from before any of us were born. My grandmother knew of such things, said they were dangerous. So they called on powers that don't forget and don't forgive. Who did this? Thomas barked. No one answered. Then Daniel said carefully, Don't know, Master. But signs like that mean someone's working roots, calling on the old ways. And when someone works roots, bad things follow. Thomas ordered the symbol scrubbed away and promised harsh punishment for anyone caught painting such marks again. But the damage was already done. Fear had settled over Waverly. 3 days later, Hutchins's prize hunting dog was found dead near the well, body stiff, foam dried around its mouth. It had been healthy that morning. Poison, Hutchins said flatly. Something fast-acting. A week before Christmas, a field worker named Samuel fell violently ill. He complained of stomach pains that worsened by the hour. By evening, he was vomiting uncontrollably, body convulsing. Celia was called, and when she examined him, her face darkened. This isn't a natural sickness, she said. He's been poisoned. Thomas felt a chill crawl down his spine. Poison? How? Can't say without knowing what he ate or drank, Celia said, but the symptoms fit several plant toxins. Then she looked him in the eye. The question isn't what poisoned him, Master. The question is who gave it to him. Samuel died 3 hours later, seizing, gasping, his body twisting in agony. Everyone saw some part of it. The fear that had been growing now turned to panic. Thomas ordered an investigation, questioning everyone who'd been near Samuel that day. The results were maddeningly inconclusive. Samuel had eaten from the communal pot, drunk from the well, and had no known enemies. There was no reason for anyone to want him dead. Unless, Thomas thought grimly, Samuel wasn't the intended target. Unless someone had been practicing, testing methods, preparing for something worse. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house set his nerves on edge. Someone on his plantation knew about poisons and was using that knowledge. Despite his earlier certainty, Thomas found his thoughts returning again and again to the Peaton estate and those 4 dead men. Christmas at Waverly was somber. Thomas had planned to give his workers 3 days off and extra rations, but Samuel's death had changed everything. Thick frost still clung to the ground, and the air carried a strange tension. People accepted their Christmas gifts with quiet thanks, avoiding eye contact and retreating quickly back to the quarters, where safety came only in numbers. That evening, Thomas was startled by a sudden commotion outside. He grabbed his pistol and ran into the freezing December night. A crowd had gathered by the well, faces flickering in torchlight. In the center, 2 men struggled to restrain a young woman, Ruth. She thrashed and screamed, her words broken, her eyes wild and unfocused. "What's happening?" Thomas shouted. Hutchins forced his way through the crowd. She tried to throw herself down the well. Sir, Daniel and Joseph caught her just in time. Ruth was about 19, a house servant who worked in the laundry. Thomas had never known her to cause trouble. "Ruth," he said, stepping closer. "What were you doing?" She stopped struggling and turned toward him. In the light of the torches, her face looked hollow and ghostly. "They're coming for me," she whispered. "I can hear them inside my head. They're telling me what I did, showing me what's going to happen. I can't make them stop. The only way to stop them is to..." She lunged toward the well again, but the men held her fast. "She's been like this for hours," one of the house servants said. "Started after sunset, talking about voices, shadows, debts coming due." That phrase, "debts coming due," made Thomas's blood run cold. It was the same thing Celia had said months before. "Get her inside," Thomas ordered. "Tie her down if you have to." And someone fetched Celia. But Celia was already there, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. She stepped forward now, and people moved aside to let her through. "Let me see her," Celia said softly. Ruth's frantic eyes locked on Celia's face, and something like recognition passed over her. You know, you understand. Tell them. Tell them what I did. Hush now, Celia said, her voice suddenly gentle, almost maternal. No need to tell anyone anything. What's done is done, and what's coming will come regardless. I didn't mean for him to die, Ruth sobbed. I was just so angry. He had no right to touch me like that. I only wanted him to hurt like he made me hurt. I didn't know the mushrooms would kill him. I swear I didn't know. The crowd went silent. Thomas felt the world tilt under his feet. Ruth, are you saying you poisoned Samuel? He asked. But Ruth wasn't looking at him. Her terrified eyes were fixed on Celia. Make it stop. Please. The voices, the shadows. Make them stop. Celia reached out and touched Ruth's forehead with 2 fingers, a gesture that felt more ritual than comfort. You can't stop what you started, child, Celia said quietly. You opened a door you didn't know was there, and now you have to walk through it. All I can do is ease the journey. What are you talking about? Thomas demanded. What door? Celia ignored him. She pulled a small glass bottle from her pocket, uncorked it, and held it to Ruth's lips. Drink this, she murmured. It'll calm the voices, quiet the shadows. You'll sleep, and when you wake, you'll be at peace. Ruth drank without hesitation. Within minutes, her body relaxed, her breathing slowed, and her eyes fluttered shut. She was carried to an empty cabin to rest, and slowly, the crowd dispersed, murmuring as they went. Before Celia could leave, Thomas caught her by the arm. What did you give her? Valerian root mostly, Celia replied calmly. Chamomile, poppy extract. Things to help her sleep. She confessed to murder, Thomas said. She confessed to being foolish, Celia corrected. The girl had relations with Samuel she didn't want. Picked some mushrooms she thought would make him sick to teach him a lesson. Didn't realize they were deadly. Easy mistake, if you don't know what you're picking. She pulled her arm free and looked at him steadily. Now she's eaten up with guilt, seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices that don't exist. The mind can do terrible things when it's cracking under the weight of what it's done. You seem to know a lot about minds breaking, Thomas said. I know about guilt, Master, Celia replied. I know how it eats people alive, how it twists them until they can't tell what's real and what's not. I know about debts and how they come due in ways people never expect. Then she walked away, leaving Thomas standing in the cold, his heart pounding and his mind filled with questions. 2 days later, Ruth was dead. She died in her sleep. Peacefully, they said. Celia examined her and declared heart failure brought on by distress. Officially, the death was ruled natural. But whispers spread fast that Celia's medicine had been something else entirely. Thomas didn't know what to believe. Ruth had confessed, yet nothing about her death brought peace or closure. How had a simple girl known enough to use poisonous mushrooms? Where had she learned about toxins at all? The answer came slowly. Thomas began watching Celia more closely. She wasn't just a healer. She was something older, deeper, a keeper of knowledge carried across oceans in the memories of stolen people. She knew herbs not from books, but from bloodlines, knowledge passed in whispers, mother to daughter, through generations, and she was teaching others. Thomas began to notice patterns, women who'd been sick spending time with Celia and emerging different, stronger, wiser. Ruth had been one of them. January brought bitter cold and a brutal ice storm that froze the plantation still. During that long confinement, Thomas finally did what he should have done months before. He broke into Celia's cabin while she was away tending to Hutchkins's wife. Inside, everything was neat, organized. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, each bundle labeled. Shelves lined with bottles and jars. A work table covered in tools, a mortar, pestle, small scale, measuring spoons. But hidden beneath her bed, he found a wooden box wrapped in cloth. Inside were notebooks, filled with Celia's handwriting. Most were medical notes, careful and methodical, but scattered among them were pages written in a different tone entirely. One entry caught his eye. Dated October 15th, 23 sick, 21 saved. The power to heal is the power to choose who lives. They don't understand this. They think my knowledge belongs to them because they own my body, but knowledge can't be owned. It can only be shared or withheld. I give mercy only to those who deserve it, and I withhold it from those who don't. That's the only power I truly have, and I wield it carefully. Every life I save is a debt in my favor. Every death I prevent tips the scales. And when the scales are balanced, justice will finally be served. Thomas's hands trembled as he turned the pages, finding more entries written in the same chilling tone. Celia was keeping a ledger, a record of moral debts. She was deciding who deserved healing and who didn't. Another entry, dated December 20th. The girl came to me in tears, told me what the man had done to her, told me she wanted him to suffer. I gave her knowledge, as I give all who ask and deserve it. It is not my place to judge what she does with it. She makes her own choices, faces her own consequences. But I also gave her something else, guilt. I planted it deep with careful words. Guilt is slower than poison, but just as deadly. It eats from within, destroys the spirit before the body fails. She will not live long. This is mercy, though she doesn't know it yet. Thomas closed the notebook gently, his thoughts racing. Celia hadn't directly poisoned Samuel, but she had taught Ruth how to do it, fully aware of her intent. Then she'd driven Ruth into madness and death through subtle manipulation, disguised as spiritual counsel. He searched further and found, wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of the box, a single sheet of yellow paper written in a different hand. My daughter, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you now carry our knowledge alone. Remember what I taught you. The plans are neither good nor evil. They simply are. We choose how to use them. Use them to heal when the scales are balanced. Use them to harm when justice demands it. But always keep the ledger. Every life saved, every death allowed, every choice made must be remembered. This is our power and our burden. We are not slaves, though they call us such. We are keepers of the old knowledge, and that knowledge makes us free in ways they will never understand or take from us. It was signed Phoebe, dated March 1838. Celia's mother, the woman who had taught her daughter not just medicine, but a philosophy of selective mercy and deliberate retribution. Thomas heard footsteps outside and quickly replaced everything before Celia entered. She paused in the doorway, her gaze shifting from Thomas to the bed, then to the hidden box. She knew. "Your wife is asking for you, master," Celia said quietly. "I don't have a wife." "Don't you? Then perhaps I misspoke. Hutchins's wife. She's asking for him, wants to see him before the end." "The end? The end that comes for us all, master. Some sooner, some later, but it always comes." She stepped inside and closed the door. "You've been in my things. There was no point in lying. I have. Did you find what you were looking for? I found your notebooks, your records, a letter from your mother. I know what you've been doing." Celia sat down slowly on the bed, moving with the weariness of someone carrying too many years. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but unwavering. "My daughter's name was Sarah. She was 17 when she caught pneumonia. Strong, bright, beautiful. Could have been anything if she'd been born free." Her eyes glistened with tears for the first time. Dr. Vance came to treat her. He was drunk. I could smell it, see it in his eyes. But he was white and educated, and I was just a slave woman, so my words meant nothing. He gave her calomel and ordered bloodletting. I told him he was wrong. He had me whipped for speaking out. Her hands tightened into fists. I watched my daughter die over 3 days. Watched the calomel poison her. Watched the bloodletting drain what little life she had left. She screamed for me while I was tied up in the barn, tied up to teach me respect for white medicine. "I'm sorry," Thomas said softly, and he meant it. "Sorry doesn't balance the scales, master." Sorry doesn't bring her back or punish the man who killed her with his arrogance and ignorance. She looked directly at him now. So I did what I had to do. Dr. Vance died of what they called influenza complications. But it wasn't influenza. It was foxglove, carefully given over weeks, enough to mimic heart failure. Marcus died because he helped hold me down. Kelly died because he laughed while they beat me. And Pedden died because he owned us all, because he created a world that let my daughter die while I watched. She stood before Thomas, her voice cold but proud. I'm not sorry. They deserve what they got. And if that makes me a murderer in your eyes, so be it. But I'm also the woman who saved 21 lives during the outbreak. The woman who delivered 37 babies last year, losing only 2. The scales balance, Master. That's all I'm doing, keeping them balanced. Thomas stood frozen, torn between horror and something disturbingly close to respect. Celia's acts were murder, deliberate and calculated, yet she had also saved dozens. Was she a monster or a healer? Could she be both? And Ruth? Thomas asked quietly. Ruth came to me for help. I gave her knowledge. She made her own choices. But I saw her the same thing I've seen in others who take a life. Guilt. It eats at the soul. I gave her peace, Master. A gentler ending than she would have found on her own. And Hutchins' wife. Celia's expression stayed unreadable. Everyone dies, Master. The only question is when, how, and whether they deserve their fate. She paused, then added, Hutchins was overseer at Petton's before he came here. He held the rope himself during my whipping. You didn't know that, did you? Thomas felt his stomach turn. No, he's not a bad man. He was following orders. Celia's gaze hardened. And my daughter died while I hung in that barn. He's part of that chain. So, yes, his wife will die, not quickly, not obviously, but inevitably. Call it murder if you want. I call it justice. The cabin seemed darker, though the candlelight hadn't changed. Thomas realized he stood at a crossroads. He could go to the authorities, have Celia arrested, but he had no proof, nothing but a collection of notebooks that might as easily be read as spiritual philosophy. And if he turned against her, who would care for the sick at Waverly? What happens now, he asked. That depends on you, Master, Celia replied. You can try to stop me, but you'll fail. Too many people depend on me. Trust me, if you move against me, there'll be rebellion. Or, she leaned closer, voice low. You can look the other way, let the scales balance themselves, and continue to benefit from my skills. Your workers will be healthier, your profits higher. All it costs is your conscience and the lives of a few men who probably deserve what they get. And if one of those men happens to be me? Thomas asked quietly. Celia tilted her head, considering. Are you guilty of anything, Master? Have you harmed someone who didn't deserve it? Killed through cruelty or carelessness? If you haven't, then you have nothing to fear from me. I don't punish the innocent. I only balance the scales. Thomas thought about his treatment of the people he owned. By the standards of slaveholding society, he was considered decent. But he was still a master, still a cog in a machine built on human bondage. In Celia's eyes, did that make him guilty? The Waverly Plantation came to you from the previous owner, Celia said softly. Did you ever wonder how he died? Thomas's mouth went dry. Natural causes. That's what I was told. He did. Heart failure after years of hard living. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't here yet. But when Petton's estate was sold off, I knew where I'd end up. Word travels among slaves faster than among masters. I knew Waverly was being sold to a new owner from Charleston. Young, inexperienced, ambitious. A man who would need a skilled healer. She stepped closer, her tone calm and deliberate. So, I made sure no one else bid on me. I told the others what happened at Petton's. Let them spread the stories to their masters. Made myself seem dangerous, cursed, bad luck. That way, only you, who didn't know any better, would buy me cheap and bring me here where I could heal, teach, and when needed, deliver justice the white courts refused to. You manipulated me from the very start, Thomas said, anger flaring beneath his fear. I used the tools available to me, Celia replied, just as you use whips, chains, and bills of sale control us. We each have our weapons, Master. Mine are simply less visible. Thomas realized he was trembling, though he couldn't tell whether from anger or fear. I could sell you, send you south, far from here, far from everyone you know. You could try, Celia said evenly, but who would buy me now? Everyone from here to Mobile has heard the stories. And if you did sell me, who would care for your sick? Who would deliver your babies? How many people would die before you found someone half as skilled? She smiled in a small, humorless smile. I've made myself necessary, Master. That's the real power, not the power to kill, but the power to save. People forgive almost anything from someone who can save lives. The truth struck Thomas like a physical blow. Celia had made herself indispensable, and in doing so, had carved out a kind of freedom no legal paper could ever grant. She couldn't be sold. She was too valuable. She couldn't be punished. Too many people relied on her. So, what do you want from me? Thomas asked finally. Nothing you aren't already giving, she said. Freedom to practice my healing, access to the herbs and plants I need, respect for my knowledge, and one more thing. Look the other way when the scales need balancing. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Don't investigate deaths too closely. Let nature take its course, even when nature has a helping hand. You're asking me to be complicit in murder. I'm asking you to be complicit in justice, Celia said quietly. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to see it. But think about this. How many slaves die every year from the cruelties of this system? How many are whipped to death, worked to death, bred like livestock, sold away from their families? And how many masters ever face punishment? The law protects you, not us. So we create our own justice in the only ways left to us. Thomas had no answer. The moral foundation he had built his life upon was crumbling, exposing contradictions he had never dared to confront. He was a slave owner who thought himself humane, a man participating in an inhuman system. Get out, he said at last, voice barely above a whisper. Leave me alone. Celia nodded and moved toward the door. But before leaving, she turned back. Hutchins's wife will die within a week. After that, Hutchins will change. He'll be quieter, less efficient. He'll start drinking. The guilt of failing to save her will eat him alive. Within a year, you'll need a new overseer. I'd suggest promoting Daniel. He's smart, fair, and the workers respect him. Thomas stared. How do you know all that? Because I've seen it before. Grief follows patterns, especially when mixed with guilt. Hutchins knows, deep down, that he's done terrible things. His wife's death will force him to face that truth, and he won't survive it. She left then, closing the door softly behind her. Thomas stood alone in the cabin for a long time, surrounded by jars of dried herbs and bottles of tinctures, feeling as if he had just brushed against something ancient and dangerous that he would never fully understand. That conversation in early January marked a turning point. Thomas didn't report what he'd learned. He didn't try to sell Celia or limit her movements. He told himself he was being practical, making the best of an impossible situation. But late at night, alone in the master's chamber, he knew the truth. He was afraid of what Celia might do if he crossed her, afraid of losing the only competent healer on the plantation, and, perhaps most disturbingly, afraid that her philosophy of balancing the scales contained more truth than he was ready to admit. Hutchins's wife died on January 9th, exactly as Celia had predicted. The woman simply faded away, growing weaker each day until, one cold morning before dawn, her breathing stopped. Hutchins was shattered. He'd sat at her bedside for 3 days, watching helplessly as she slipped away despite Celia's constant care. Or perhaps, Thomas thought darkly, because of it, the change in Hutchins was immediate and complete. The lean, disciplined overseer who had once run Waverly with iron precision became a hollow shell. He still performed his duties, but mechanically, without the sharpness that had once defined him. He began drinking heavily, starting with whiskey at noon and continuing until he was nearly incoherent by evening. Thomas tried to speak to him several times, but Hutchins would just stare at him with red-rimmed eyes and mutter, "She shouldn't have died, Mr. Pruitt. She was only 43, strong as an ox, until she wasn't. Doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense." By February, Hutchins was useless as an overseer. Thomas had no choice but to promote Daniel, just as Celia had once suggested. Daniel accepted the position with quiet dignity and quickly proved effective at managing the other workers. He was firm but fair, respected rather than feared, and under his supervision, production actually increased. Celia's influence continued to spread. Women from neighboring plantations began arriving at Waverly, some with their master's permission, some without, seeking her advice on everything from difficult pregnancies to mysterious illnesses that white doctors couldn't cure. Thomas found himself in the strange position of running what was essentially a medical practice, with Celia as a true practitioner and himself merely the owner. The income from these visits was considerable. By March, Celia's healing had earned nearly $800, more than some field hands could produce in an entire year. Thomas kept precise records, depositing the money into his account at the Planters Bank of Savannah, convincing himself he was simply managing his plantation efficiently. But deep down, he knew better. Every dollar she earned tied him closer to her, made her more indispensable, more protected. He was becoming complicit, not through action, but through quiet acceptance, through the slow erosion of principle in exchange for profit. Then, in late March, something happened that forced Thomas to confront just how deeply he had fallen into Celia's web. A man arrived at Waverly one afternoon on an expensive horse, dressed in the fine clothing of Charleston's merchant class. His name was Robert Petton, the nephew of the late Dr. Harold Petton, the man who had once owned Celia. Thomas received him in the main parlor, offering bourbon and the careful politeness Southern hospitality demanded. But Petton waved away the drink and got straight to his purpose. "Mr. Pruitt, I understand you purchased a woman named Celia at auction last August. I want to buy her from you." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "Celia is not for sale. She's a valuable worker, essential to my plantation's operations. I'll pay 5 times what you paid, $60. Still no?" Petton leaned forward, his tone darkening. "Let me be direct. That woman murdered my uncle and 3 other men. I can't prove it in court, but I know it as surely as I know my own name. She's dangerous, Mr. Pruitt. Every day you keep her here, you put yourself and everyone on this plantation at risk." "Those are serious accusations without evidence," Thomas replied. "Evidence?" Petton laughed bitterly. "My uncle died 3 months after that woman's daughter passed. His overseer, his driver, his personal physician, all dead within weeks of each other. You call that coincidence?" "I call unfortunate timing," Thomas said evenly. "People die, Mr. Petton. It's the nature of life." "Don't patronize me," Petton snapped. "I've done my research. I know about the outbreak here last October, how 23 people fell ill, and she saved most of them. I know about the field hand who died of poisoning in December, the girl named Ruth who tried to throw herself down a well before Christmas. And I know Hutchins' wife died just last month." His voice dropped low. "See a pattern yet?" Cold spread through Thomas's chest. When laid out like that, the deaths did form a pattern, but he forced his voice to remain calm. "Celia saved 21 lives during that outbreak. She's delivered dozens of healthy babies. She's the best healer in Chatham County. And I'm not selling her to satisfy your vendetta. You're a fool." Petton rose abruptly. "My uncle was a fool, too. He thought he could control her, use her gifts while ignoring the danger. He's dead now. His overseer's dead. Everyone close to him is dead. How long before she decides you're next? I appreciate your concern, Thomas said coldly, but my answer's final. Celia stays at Waverly. Peton stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. When you end up like my uncle, don't say you weren't warned. That woman is a plague, Mr. Pruitt, and plagues don't stop until they consumed everything in their path. After Peton left, Thomas stood on the portico, watching him ride away. His hands trembled, not from anger, but from the creeping realization that Peton might be right. He was in danger. He had known it since reading Celia's journals, since understanding what she was capable of. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. That night, Thomas did something he had avoided for months. He sat in his study and went through his plantation records, documenting every death and illness since Celia's arrival. The pattern became undeniable. Samuel, dead from poisoning in December, after Celia had been treating him for a minor injury. Ruth, driven to madness and death after confessing to Samuel's murder, with Celia present at her breakdown. Hutchkins's wife, lingering for months with a wasting sickness Celia claimed to be treating, kept alive just long enough to prolong her husband's suffering. And there were others Thomas hadn't considered. An elderly field hand who died in his sleep in November. Natural causes, though he'd been in perfect health the day before. A house servant who fell down the stairs in January. An accident. But she complained about Celia days earlier, saying the herb woman frightened her. 5 deaths in 6 months. Perhaps more if he counted the ones less obvious. But there were also the lives saved. 21 during the outbreak, 37 successful births, countless minor ailments cured. Celia's ledger was working exactly as she described. Lives saved, lives taken. The scales balancing in some unseen logic. What Thomas couldn't answer was where he stood on those scales. Was he guilty in Celia's eyes? Had he done something or failed to do something that marked him for punishment? He treated his slaves better than most masters, didn't he? He provided food, shelter, medical care. He rarely used a whip. He didn't, but he was still a master. He still owned human beings. He still profited from their forced labor. In Celia's world of absolute justice, was that alone enough to condemn him? Thomas began taking precautions. He no longer ate food prepared by the house servants, unless he watched it made from start to finish. He locked his bedroom door at night and kept a loaded pistol on his bedside table. He avoided being alone with Celia whenever possible. He examined everything she sent to main house, tonics, herbs, teas, searching for signs of tampering, though he wouldn't have recognized them even if they were there. But he didn't send her away. He didn't sell her, restrict her movements, or confront her about Peton's visit. Doing so would mean admitting fear, and a master who showed fear to slaves had already surrendered control. April brought warm weather and the start of the planting season. The fields had to be plowed, the seed sown, the irrigation ditches cleared. It was exhausting work that demanded every able body, and Thomas threw himself into it with near-obsessive energy. Physical labor dulled his thoughts. About Celia, about the deaths, about the moral compromises he made each day. But Celia would not let him forget. On the morning of April 15th, Thomas opened his door to find a small cloth bundle tied with twine. Inside were unfamiliar dried herbs and a folded note in Celia's careful handwriting. For your health, master, steep 1 spoonful in hot water each morning. It will ease the tension you carry and help you sleep better at night. Consider it a gift from someone who wishes you no harm, as long as you continue to deserve none. The meaning was unmistakable. Celia knew about his precautions, his fear, his avoidance. She was telling him, plainly, that he was safe for now. The last line was a true warning, as long as you continue to deserve none. Thomas stared at the herbs for a long while. Was this a sincere gesture of help, or a test, to see if he still trusted her? Or worse, the beginning of a slow, undetectable poisoning? He threw the herbs into the fire and watched them burn. The smoke rose with a bitter, acrid scent. That night, He slept with his pistol cocked and his door barred, but her message had done its work. Thomas knew now that Celia was aware of everything, his fears, his habits, even his locked door. If she had wanted him dead, he would be dead. The fact that he was alive meant only one thing. She had chosen to let him live. The balance of power had shifted completely. Thomas might still hold the title of master, but Celia now decided who lived and who died on Waverly Plantation. The situation worsened in early May. Hutchkins, who had been drinking himself to death since his wife's passing, finally succeeded. Thomas found him in the old overseer's cabin, the same one Celia had once occupied, with an empty bottle of laudanum on the table beside him. The death was ruled a suicide, the result of grief and whiskey, yet something bothered Thomas. The bottle of laudanum was one Celia had prepared months earlier for Hutchkins's wife to ease her pain in her final days. How had Hutchkins come to possess it? Had he saved it from her belongings? Or had someone given it to him? Knowing what he might do, Thomas questioned Daniel carefully, avoiding any direct accusation. "Mr. Hutchkins was a troubled man, sir," Daniel said evenly. He couldn't forgive himself for what he'd done. His wife's death broke something inside him. The laudanum only made the end come quicker and gentler. Did Celia give it to him? Thomas asked. Daniel met his eyes. "Does it matter, sir?" The man was already dead inside. His body just took longer to catch up. Thomas realized then it was Celia's logic, spoken through Daniel. Hutchkins was guilty of something. His part in Celia's whipping at Plantation Plantation had sealed his fate. Whether he had taken his own life or been quietly helped toward it was irrelevant. Justice, in Celia's view, had been served. Thomas arranged a simple burial and promoted another worker to fill Daniel's former position. Life at Waverly went on. Fields to tend, work to be done. But beneath the routines, Thomas felt the ground shifting, eroding, threatening to give way completely. In mid-May, an unexpected visitor arrived. Josiah Crenshaw, the planner who had first warned him about Celia nearly a year earlier. Crenshaw looked older, more hollowed out, his face marked with worry. "Mr. Pruitt," Crenshaw said as they sat on the portico, untouched glasses of bourbon between them, "I owe you an apology. I should have been more forceful in my warning last year. Should have made you understand what that woman truly is." "I understand now," Thomas said quietly. "Do you?" Crenshaw leaned forward. "Do you understand she's not just a murderer? She's something far more dangerous. She's building a network, Mr. Pruitt, teaching other women her knowledge, spreading her creed of balance and retribution. There are whispers all across Chatham County of women meeting in secret, learning about herbs and poisons, talking of debts, scales, and justice." Thomas felt ice in his veins. "How do you know this?" "Because it's happening on my plantation, too," Crenshaw said grimly. "3 of my women spend time with her when she visits nearby properties. They've changed, become bolder, more knowing. One of them looked me straight in the eye last week and said, 'The old ways are coming back, Master. Best you remember that.' Tell me, what am I supposed to do with that?" Thomas hesitated, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. "Have you considered," he said slowly, "that maybe we deserve it? The old ways she talks about, the balance she's restoring. Maybe it's justice we've been avoiding for generations." Crenshaw stared at him in disbelief. "She's gotten to you. God help me. That woman has truly gotten inside your head. She saved 21 people during the outbreak. Crenshaw. She's delivered dozens of healthy babies. She's healed the sick when white doctors failed. Yes, people have died around her, but far more have lived. Isn't that what you'd call a net positive?" "A net positive?" Crenshaw snapped, rising abruptly. "Listen to yourself. You're excusing murder because the murderer happens to be useful. That isn't justice, Mr. Pute. That's moral bankruptcy." He left without another word. Thomas sat alone on the portico as evening shadows crept across the fields, wondering when exactly he had crossed the line, from reluctant acceptance to active defense of Celia's actions. When had he stopped seeing her as a threat and started seeing her as a necessary correction to an unjust world. The horrifying answer came to him slowly. He had been moving toward this since the day he found her journals. Every day he failed to act against her, every death he justified away, every life she saved that benefited him. Each had chipped away at his moral foundation until it had become exactly what Crenshaw accused him of being: complicit. June came with crushing heat and suffocating humidity that made every breath feel like drowning. The cotton grew thick and strong, but the air carried sickness, fever, dysentery, exhaustion. Celia worked tirelessly, moving from one patient to the next. Her herb garden had spread wide, filled with medicinal plants Thomas couldn't even name. Watching her, Thomas saw, perhaps the first time, the full, impossible complexity of who she was. She was a murderer, yes, but also a healer who cared deeply for those she treated. She was a philosopher with a terrible yet coherent moral logic, a teacher passing on knowledge that predated slavery and would outlive it, an agent of justice in a world that offered none to people like her. And she was, Thomas finally admitted, the most remarkable person he had ever met. The realization should have terrified him more than it did. On June 23rd, Celia came to the main house and asked to speak with him privately. Her first time initiating such a meeting since their confrontation 6 months earlier. They sat in the study, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. Celia looked tired but calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I'm going to tell you something, Master," she said quietly, "and I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded. "There's a man coming tomorrow. His name is Benjamin Lell. Owns a rice plantation on the Ogeechee River. You might remember him from the auction where you bought me. He was one of the men who refused to bid." Thomas did remember. Lell had been speaking with Crenshaw outside the auction house, whispering about Celia's reputation. "He's coming because his daughter's sick, 17, same age as my Sarah was. The local doctor can't help her, and Lell's desperate enough to come to me. He'll ask you to let me treat her. And will you?" Thomas asked. Celia's expression was unreadable. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether the scales demand it." She paused, then continued with eerie calm. "Benjamin Lell was at Peyton's plantation the day they whipped me. He didn't take part, but he was there, saw them tie me up in that barn, saw my daughter die inside the house, and he did nothing, just turned away because it was easier." Thomas felt a knot tightening in his chest. "So you're going to let his daughter die?" "I'm going to make him understand," Celia said softly. "Understand what it feels like to watch your child suffer, while someone who could help chooses not to. I'll let him feel the pain I felt in that barn, the helplessness. And when he's begged, when he's desperate enough to promise anything if only I'll save her, then I'll decide. Maybe I'll heal her. Maybe I won't. The scales will tell me which is right." "That's monstrous," Thomas whispered. "Is it?" Celia asked. "Or is it just a mirror held up to what's been done to us for generations? He had power and chose not to use it. Now I have power, and I'm choosing as he did. If that makes me monstrous, then we're all monsters, Master. Every one of us." Thomas said nothing. Her logic was horrifying, circular, flawless, impossible to refute. "I'm telling you this," Celia continued, "because tomorrow you'll have a choice. Lell will beg you to command me to help his daughter. You have the legal right. I'm your property. My skills belong to you. But if you give that order, you'll become part of the chain. You'll owe a debt that the scales will demand I balance." The threat hung unspoken but crystal clear. Thomas swallowed. "Why warn me, then?" "Because despite everything," Celia said quietly, "I don't want to see you on the wrong side of the scales. You're not a good man. You own slaves, and that makes you part of evil. But you're not a cruel man. You don't take pleasure in suffering. You try to treat us as well as the system allows. That doesn't make you innocent, but it might keep you alive." She stood, then turned back one last time. "When Lell comes tomorrow, remember this. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm asking for your non-interference. There's a difference. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He paced his room, pistol on the table, his mind a storm of questions. Could he stop Celia? Legally, yes, she was his property. Practically, no, she had become indispensable. And more importantly, did he want to stop her? Lel had watched her daughter die and done nothing. Shouldn't he face justice? Real justice, even if it didn't come from the law? The thought haunted Thomas until morning, when Benjamin Lel arrived, exhausted and desperate. "Mr. Pute," he pleaded, "my daughter Catherine is deathly ill. I've heard you have a slave woman with extraordinary medical skill. Please, I'll pay whatever you ask. Just let her come." Thomas looked into the man's desperate eyes and saw, with terrible clarity, exactly what Celia had meant. He had seen this look before, a year ago, in the barn at Peyton's plantation. A man begging for help that might never come. Helpless in the face of forces he couldn't control. "I'll send for her," Thomas said slowly, "but I can't promise she'll agree to treat your daughter. She makes her own decisions about which patients to accept." "But you're her master," Lel protested. "You can order her." "I can," Thomas admitted, "but I won't. If you want her help, you'll have to ask her yourself and live with whatever decision she makes." When Celia arrived, Lel's desperation shattered what little pride he had left. He actually fell to his knees before her, tears streaming down his face. "Please, she's only 17. She's done nothing wrong. Whatever you want, whatever you need, I'll give it. Just save my daughter." Celia looked down at him with an unreadable expression. "Tell me, Mr. Lel," she asked softly, "do you remember visiting the Peyton plantation last summer?" Lel's face went pale. Yes. I was there on business." "Do you remember what you saw in the barn?" "Please," Lel stammered, "that has nothing to do with—" "Do you remember?" Celia's voice cut like a blade. Lel swallowed hard. "Yes," he whispered. "I remember. I saw them whipping you. I saw your daughter in the house. I heard her crying. I wanted to say something, but it wasn't my place. It wasn't my business. You looked away," Celia said coldly. "You chose the comfort of silence over the burden of doing what was right. You let my daughter die without saying a word in our defense." "I'm sorry," Lel sobbed. "God help me, I'm sorry. I think about it every day. I should have said something, should have done something. I was a coward, and your daughter paid for my cowardice." He broke down completely, trembling on the floor. "I know I deserve whatever judgment you give me," he whispered, "but my daughter doesn't. She's innocent. Please don't make her pay for my sins." The room fell silent. Thomas watched Celia's face, trying to read what she would do. This was the moment she had built toward, the perfect reflection of her own suffering. She had the power now to let Catherine Lel die, to make Benjamin Lel feel the pain she had endured. The scales demanded it. Justice required it. But then, Celia did something Thomas never expected. She reached down and helped Lel to his feet. "Take me to your daughter," she said quietly. "I'll examine her and do what I can." Lel's expression shifted from despair to stunned hope. You'll help her?" "I'm a healer, Mr. Lel," Celia said. "That's what I do. But understand this. The debt isn't canceled. You owe me a life now. And one day I'll collect. Maybe not today, maybe not this year. But someday the scales will balance. And when that time comes, you'll pay what you owe." Lel nodded rapidly. "Yes, anything. I promise." "What I need," Celia said softly, "is for you to remember. Remember what it feels like to be helpless. Remember what it feels like to have your child's life in someone else's hands. Remember what it feels like to beg for mercy. And next time you see someone in that same position, don't look away. That's all the payment I ask. Not money, not favors, just the courage to do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." She left with Lel, and Thomas remained alone in the study, his understanding of her once again transformed. Celia wasn't simply taking revenge. She was teaching. Every death, every healing, every act of mercy or cruelty was part of a larger lesson. The scales didn't just balance life against death. They weighed action against inaction, cruelty against compassion, silence against courage. 3 days later, Celia returned. Catherine Lowe will recover, she reported. The girl had been suffering from an infection worsened by calomel and bloodletting, treatments prescribed by the local doctor. Celia had stopped them, cleaned the lungs with herbs and steam, and rebuilt the girl's strength with proper food and rest. Will Lel keep his promise? Thomas asked. He will, Celia replied, because he finally understands what I was trying to teach him. Fear changes behavior, but understanding changes the heart. Lel will be a different man now, better than he was. That's worth more than his death. You could have let her die, Thomas said quietly. The scales demanded it. The scales demanded something, yes, Celia said. But I chose what that something would be. That's the power I hold, not just to take life, but to shape it, to turn someone's worst moment into a chance to become better. She paused. That's what my mother taught me. The old knowledge isn't only about poison or healing. It's about understanding human nature deeply enough to change it. Summer moved on. The cotton rose tall, and life at Waverly returned to its rhythm. But nothing was the same. Thomas saw in the way the enslaved carried themselves. Prouder, stronger. He saw it in how white planters spoke to Celia now, with a respect that bordered on fear. And he saw it in himself, in the way he no longer thought himself as a master, but as a man who only appeared to own what he could no longer truly control. The Civil War was coming. Everyone could feel it. The air thick with tension, like pressure before a storm. South Carolina would secede. Others would follow, and the entire system that sustained Waverly would crumble. Strangely, Thomas felt at peace. Through Celia, he had glimpsed an alternative world, one built not on chains and ownership, but on knowledge, skill, and moral power. When slavery ended, and it would end, Celia and people like her would thrive. In early September, as the cotton ripened, Thomas called Celia to his study. I've decided to manumit you, he said. I'm filing papers to make you legally free. Celia's face didn't change. Why? Because you're already free, Thomas said. You have been since the day I bought you, maybe even before. The papers just make it official. And what do you expect in return? Nothing. Stay or leave, it's your choice. I'm not placing conditions. There are always conditions, Master, Celia said quietly. Not this time, Thomas replied. Call my attempt to balance my own scales. I've profited from an evil system. I can't undo that, but I can at least free one person who should never have been enslaved. Celia studied him in silence, then smiled, a genuine, warm smile. You've learned something, she said. Not everything I tried to teach you, but enough. Enough to survive what's coming. What is coming? Thomas asked. War. Revolution. The end of everything you know, she said. But you'll survive, because you understand now that power isn't about ownership. It's about knowledge, skill, and relationships with people who have reasons to keep you alive. She stood. I'll stay at Waverly for now. These people still need me, and I'm not done teaching. But I'll stay as a free woman, not as your property. Let's see how that changes things. The manumission papers were filed in October, granting Celia legal freedom. The act caused whispers all through Chatham County. Why would a planter free such a valuable slave? Thomas didn't explain. Celia continued her work, training women in the healing arts, building a network of knowledge keepers, preparing for the world that would rise after the old one fell. Thomas managed Waverly with a new awareness. He wasn't its master, only its caretaker. The final entry in his diary, dated December 31st, 1859, read, I bought Celia for $12 and thought I'd made a bargain. Instead, I gained something far more dangerous, a teacher who showed me the difference between legal authority and moral power. between ownership and control, between what the law allows and what conscience demands. I don't know if what she taught me makes me better or worse, saved or damned, but I know I'm different now, and the world is changing with me. We're all standing on the edge of something vast and terrible, a reckoning generations in the making. When it comes, I believe it will be people like Celia, those who've kept the old knowledge alive, who will survive, and perhaps who will shape what comes next. This story reminds us that the most terrifying power isn't always violence or the supernatural, but human knowledge, wielded by someone with both the skill to heal and the will to judge. The tale of Celia and Thomas Pute shows that every system built on injustice carries the seeds of its own destruction, and those seeds are often nurtured by the very people the system tried to oppress. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was truly revealed? Did Thomas make the right choice? And were the deaths at Peyton's plantation really natural, or was Celia responsible? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. See you in the next video.